Hi, my name is Ryan Hurd. I am the founder of Caregiver Smart Solutions. Today we're going to talk tech with an assistant professor at Jefferson University. We're going to talk about what kind of technology is out there, what kind of technology is she interested in seeing, and how technology could be a useful tool in giving OTs the ability to provide a better solution for their clients. So stick around and check us out. All right, here we are. I am here with Monique Chabot, which is an assistant professor at Jefferson University. Monique, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm living the dream as usual. So, very interesting. You know, I looked at your information online, and I got to tell you, you've got a lot of acronyms after your name. You have a very impressive resume. So, tell me a little about it. What do you do? Where you come from? All that good stuff.
So I'm an assistant professor at Thomas Jefferson University on the East Falls campus in Philadelphia. My clinical background is in geriatric house calls. So I was essentially an outpatient clinician who would go to people's houses. So it's a little different than home health in terms of how it deals with Medicare, basically, and what I was able and allowed to do. Some slightly different rules that gave me a lot more freedom and actually kind of led to some of the acronyms that you are referring to behind my name.
Right.
But it was in my my practice. I was going into people's homes, assisted living facilities, independent living facilities, and adult day centers, and really working on that last step of an older adult's rehabilitation after an event, or actually getting to be proactive and catch things before bad things happened, and keep things from getting worse, or keep them from having that fall and that hip fracture, helping support cognition. So that was really kind of the mindset of the company I used to work for. And it was while I was doing all of that I realized that many of these environments that were set up for older adults were not really older adult friendly. I have a list of pictures and just honestly like a book of just complaints of things that I saw where they were actually, it was making things much, much, much worse, and it never had to be that way.
Wow.
And so somewhere along the line, I decided to get my clinical doctorate in occupational therapy to actually address that. And kind of fell into the home modifications world, the environmental design world, started thinking about working with built environment designers and technology and smart technology, and just really looking at all those different pieces and how we can really support our older adults. Because there's a lot I can do as a clinician to help with balance, to help with strength, to help educate their caregivers and educate them on different strategies, like anything it took to keep them independent and keep them doing the things they have to do every day. And that's my job as an occupational therapist. It's making sure that you can get the things that mean something to you, or that you just quite frankly have to do, done every day safely, independently, despite whatever you might have going on. But the environment is a different piece.
And that's true.
And that's sometimes the biggest one.
So you weren't you weren't just in school and just kept on going to school and became a professor. You've literally been in the field. You've been in mom's home, and you've literally seen the real world issues.
Yeah, I worked solely in the field for 5.5 years, and then even now, I was hired as a clinical faculty member, so I have to do clinical work at least 8 hours a month or whatever it is. I would do way more than that because, quite frankly, I love teaching. I love my students, but I also love being in the field because it reminds me why I went into OT in the first place.
Right.
And then my research is all in there and everything. So right now I still work for Habitat for Humanity. I work in a program called Capable, which is out of Hopkins, and it's a home modifications and environmental aging in place type program, but it's 6 visits from an occupational therapist, which was a big deal because up until, I guess, just last year, OT could not open cases in the home under regular home health. Under Med B, which I was working under, I could, but it's not really home health, it's outpatient. So, but this program allowed me to open a case. And so it was actually a huge thing in my field, and it was a key piece of my doctorate research. So I have to be on this project. It's like seeing stars and celebrities for me. There's also some nursing visits, and then the handyman who comes in and does these things. And we do home modifications, and then we work with the client on reaching 3 specific goals they have. So I'm still extremely active in the field, in the home environments world. It's actually, most of the acronyms behind my name now are actually home modifications and environmental modification specialties.
So when we say, let's go down the path, right? So let's say our loved one, mom, an event happens, she falls, and then let's say she breaks her hip. She goes into the emergency room. From the emergency room, they physically fix her up. Then
Right.
she goes into a skilled nursing facility where they're going to help her get stronger and whatnot. And then at some point, she's going to be released, hopefully. She's either going to be released into an assisted living facility or back to her home. Now, when we talk about back to her home, you have concerns from a physical aspect, right? And that's part of what the acronyms are. So tell me a little bit more about that in the home.
So what do you mean by the acronym? I mean, my CAPS and CLIP certification?
Yeah, your CAPS and CLIP certification. So what are you looking for in the home? What are you worried about that might be an issue for mom in the home?
When I would go and see someone after like an event like that, usually if they still have a nursing need, they'll go under home health and have the nurse and everyone come out, and then I might see them maybe a month or two after they're discharged. Depends on when they're done with that part. Occasionally I would get contracts where I would see them right away. I'd be kind of that therapy side of that team. I would actually usually start off by finding out why they fell in the first place. Because maybe it was something physical. It could very well have been. It could have tripped over a rug, their pet, their knee gave out. I have a lot of people who said to me, honestly, I made a really bad decision that morning and like just did something I knew I wasn't supposed to do.
Right.
But sometimes it's vision, sometimes it's cognition, sometimes it was actually a sign of something worse going on. Like I've seen a lot of hip fractures from people who are having urinary tract infections. And for some reason in older adults, it's not the urinary symptoms that are first, it's actually a complete change in mental status. To the point where I've walked in on people actually having one and was calling 911 because I actually thought they were having a stroke. That's what the symptoms look like.
Wow, I never knew that.
Yeah, and thank goodness it was just a UTI. Because that's what it really looked like to me. A person who usually knew me had no idea who I was at all. Sometimes they get really agitated. It's really interesting. So I was like, what was it that actually caused the issue in the first place? And then I also find out kind of like where's their baseline status before the injury? Where are they now? Because sometimes going through the hospitalization system and going through skilled nursing and all those different things actually can affect their cognition, because the home is a very supportive place. And you think about like whenever we move houses, like back when we used to move around between apartments, like how you were kind of out of it for a couple of weeks.
True.
Well, that's far more pronounced in our older adults because they have structures that keep them basically mentally put together in their home. And when you take them out of it, that can do it. And we also just know there's a correlation between hospitalizations and like the start of a decline of cognition. And so I try to get an idea of what's going on right then and there. Then I look at their strength, I look at their range of motion, I look at other things that are going on in their home. Did they have home modifications already done that weren't done right, or just quite frankly aren't appropriate anymore? It could be either one. What's their family support? What durable medical equipment do they have? How good are they at actually using it? Because again, they probably got really good skilled nursing and you put it in the home and all the cues in the home will tell them to get in and out of the shower their old way, even though they know full well how to use that tub bench. Like it's actually a very comprehensive evaluation to see everything that's going on with this person and then figure out where to go from there.
So you had said something that was very interesting to me. When we talk about our environment, nobody wants to go to the doctor. Nobody wants to stay in the hospital. I mean, even us, right? We like to go in and say hi to all our friends, but we really don't want to be in there for any amount of time. It's interesting from a psychological aspect to have our aging loved ones stay in home. Everybody throws around the aging in place or living in place conversations, but at the end of the day, there's a psychological component. There's a comfort level with staying in the environment that they know, right? So I guess what you're doing from one aspect on the physical level by looking at every aspect of the home, you're trying to enable them to retain that independence, whether it's a grab bar, whether it's, make sure hallways are a minimum of 3 feet wide, make sure there's things there that, helps that person get around. And it's interesting that you're looking into their background, like, why did this happen? So if they were very active in the first place and they tripped on a rug.
Yeah, I might honestly not be as worried about that particular one. Like someone I come in, they say, oh, I fell yesterday. I'm like, tell me what happened. And then sometimes it truly is like, honestly, I just turned too fast. I got dizzy, or I tripped over something, or like my kid left a bag in the way. And then I'm like, let's try not to do that again. But I'm not really super worried about that one
Right.
compared to, I just always struggle to get up the stairs. Like, okay, well, we need to figure out, is it balance? Is it strength? Can you see the stairs? What's going on a bit more there.
So really, like one of the big core problems is falls, right? Everybody's looking at falls and how can we prevent falls, but I think a lot of the unknowns, like you'd said it before, urinary tract infection, and that could lead to a fall. Dehydration that can lead to a fall. What other things inside the house, other than like the typical trip, like what kind of things can lead to a fall?
I see people actually fall a lot getting out of chairs. They might have chairs that are too low, or I had a whole series. Like there's one part of town where I guess culturally, everyone covers their furniture in plastic.
Okay.
I hate that because everyone slides off of that, which is interesting. And then actually our beds nowadays, a number of my clients who have to like basically pole vault to get into them because they're so high now. Right? So there's like all those little things. I have a lot of people like with vision, like there's a lot of age-related visual conditions that will affect your vision, but then there's just natural vision changes as you get older, and the fact that they just need more light. And I can promise you, nobody, probably not even you and me, have enough light in our homes. I'm constantly putting lights over basement stairs, in particular. Like I know where the light is when I get down there. I'm like, yeah, except for the fact you have to get down a whole flight to get to that light switch.
So I guess that when we're talking about light and vision, not only is it like vision, like I guess when we usually say vision, we're thinking like fuzzy or whatnot, but it can also be depth of field. Like I can't tell, how far my foot's got to go down or up, and then I catch the tread and then I fall, kind of a thing.
And color contrast is another big one too. Being able to actually understand what you're seeing might not be a hole. But it actually is a different part of the tile. Like I see that in my facilities a lot. It drives me nuts. These so my own grandmother in her facility, she has undisclosed eye conditions because she's one who hasn't gone to a doctor in like 60 years. So we honestly have zero idea what grandmama has. None. And we'll never know.
We just
honestly
know she's having an issue.
We just know she can't see quite right because we've pieced it together over the years. But there's this tile floor in her facility, and it was beautiful. It was gray, and it had a big black tile with like an accent tile around it, and it was kind of sporadic. And I was sitting in there downstairs waiting for the nurse and talked about for my grandfather, and I'm watching all the residents and my grandmother swerving between them because they were seeing that black spot as a hole. And so I was like, oh, that's not the best choice of color right there. So yes, the color perception and then like the color contrast can be really good, or you can actually, it's like I call it a power for good or evil to my students. You have to use it wisely for it to be effective. Otherwise, you're going to have some trouble. And same thing with glare, like the light that bounces up into the eyes. That's another problem for a lot of my older adults. So they could have been just fine, but then like the glare from the window, the sun was coming in, it bounced off the countertop, and now they're essentially blinded. And then, they might drop the knife and cut themselves. They might trip because they can't see now because they're just going to be so much more sensitive to the light.
So it's a combination of how the eyes are working as well as the brain. So when you see something black like that, the brain is interpreting it as possibly a hole, and we don't want to step into that hole because it's harder to have that depth perception and tell the difference between this tile and that tile. That's very interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot. The vision, more I've been recently learning, talking about adding more acronyms to the back of my name. I've been now starting to play more in the visual realm to learn more about it. And it's far more intricate and complicated than I think any of us realized, like even more than I realized as a clinician. It's very interesting.
Well, let me ask you this. So if we're talking about, if fall is one of the biggest things in the environment that we really have to try to focus on. So we've pulled up things like urinary tract infection, dehydration, make sure they're drinking enough, visual. What other kind of things? I've also heard like if somebody gets up too fast, they have blood issues and then they pass out right there. What other kind of things would be an indicator of somebody, falling?
Like orthostatic hypotension is a good one, where their blood pressure will drop when they stand up. Vertigo. I see a lot of people right now through Habitat who have vertigo.
Really?
And I mean, in all my years, I've never had maybe more than one person occasionally, and I've got like 3 on my caseload right now. And so some of it's been educating them on how not to get their symptoms all riled up, but then also using cues in the environment. Like I have someone who spins in her kitchen because of the way the kitchen's set up. There's not much we can do about the kitchen itself.
Right,
But
right.
like I have, we actually, there's a lot of magnetic surfaces luckily. So we put magnets in different spots so that as she turns, she has a spot to look and spot,
Ah,
and to kind of also cues her to slow down. And so vertigo, I think, is one, because I mean, it can cause your entire sense of the world to just completely shift based on what they've been describing to me. They feel like their entire equilibrium just goes on an angle and they really can't tell what's up and down anymore.
and then all of a sudden they kind of lose their
Hmm.
steadiness.
Yeah. So there's that. We have a lot, like in my world, a lot of false screens that look at how fast you get up,
Okay.
and also how long it takes you to go about 10 feet away, come turn back around and come sit back down again, and then how far you can actually reach. And the 3 tests that I'm referring to in particular, those 3 are very closely correlated to either a risk for falls, or in the case of the reaching one, it actually can predict how many falls you're more likely to have over like the next 6 months.
Really?
Mhm. And so that's something else that I look at too, is like just basic physical ability. Can you reach forward and to the side? Can you actually get up, go around the 10-foot thing with or without a mobility device? Doesn't matter for that test. If you can do it in less than 17 seconds, you're at a lesser risk of falls. Higher than that, you're probably going to fall.
So these are
And
all things
then,
that have been mapped out over time that
mhm.
you can,
And
tell.
we use it to track progress, actually. So it's one of our fall screens. So we would like do like a screening event sometimes and pick up people who are just sort of like at the edge or starting to have problems. When I
Right.
have someone who, like the example of the person coming home from the hospital from a hip fracture, like I would be doing all these tests and then testing them again, like basically every month until discharge, to track progress and strength and
Right.
balance, and even just yeah, I think it's mostly strength and balance, those two, because it's like a lower extremity strength type stuff. So
Oh,
I know that there's been some research into like building sensors into toilet seats to
right.
time how long it takes you to get up, because that's one of the tests. It's like, it's how many times can you get up 5 times? How long does it take you to get up 5 times? And you can actually potentially pick up someone getting slower at it. And that is actually an indication that a fall might be in the future.
Now, on that, you had said something in a past conversation we had about, can I tell with my system if the lights were left on? And I'm thinking about it from a forgetfulness. If somebody left their lights on overnight, maybe they forgot,
Mhm.
it could be an indicator of early on stage dementia. Sure, he's forgetting a lot of things. But you're saying, well, if that person left the lights on, it could indicate to you that she's having visual issues because she's leaving the lights on. So when she gets up at night, she doesn't trip. What other
It,
like indicators or environmental indicators would be like that? Like what other things could you look at that could say, there might be an issue going forward?
um, so I think some of the ones that come to mind, and like thinking through like all the things I see, uh,
Right.
I see people who push furniture closer together so they can use it to stabilize themselves as they walk along. We
Ah,
tend to heavily discourage furniture walking. It's much better to have an actual device. Though in some homes are too narrow, and like actually that's kind of the best option we have. I hate to say, it's like one of those non-textbook situations that we don't
right.
really talk about. But that's one thing I do see often. I see that. I see things like leaving like all sorts of interesting systems to try to leave appointment cards out that might not be completely organized, but it's their attempt to try to remember medical appointments.
Okay.
And sometimes we end up looking into that system that they have to create something a little bit more efficient and actually what actually will work. Um, I see, people moving furniture closer to the bed so they actually have like a rail to kind of help them get out.
Okay.
And that's easily fixed with a bed rail.
Mhm.
In terms of vision, I don't really see a lot because people tend to not realize that they need more light until I literally put my phone up underneath their cabinet and say, this is what task lighting would do. What do you think? And then they go,
Uh,
oh. 'Cause it's actually a very sneaky, insidious process unless you actually like have glaucoma and like that your vision has been going for some time. They don't actually realize that they've lost that much sensitivity to light over
mhm.
the decades. And then they're like, oh my gosh, like yeah, that does make things a lot better.
Well, I guess if
Um,
it changes a little over time, you just adapt to it. And
You
then at
never
one
know.
point you realize, man, I'm half blind. I can't see
Right.
anything.
Right. At
Right.
that point, it's like, oh, and they think, well, what do I do? I'm just old. And I'm like, well, actually, there's a lot we can do. And it's actually normal, quite frankly, and it's okay. Trying to think some of the other things I see. Yeah, I see some people who tend to adapt and like come up with ideas, and they might put the grab bars in, but might have it in the wrong place or things like that because they just went out and did something. But for the most part, I find that people don't do much, actually. They either don't know
Okay.
what to do,
Uh,
or they're afraid that it will tell them that they're old. And so then they're reluctant to do it. Or it just never really crossed their mind. They just like, this is the way it is. Or they're not even aware that there's a problem, honestly.
hmm,
So I see a lot of that more in my practice where then I talk about, well, here's some suggestions, here's some ideas. What do you think about these things? A lot of people will tend to have a favorite chair after a while.
right.
And that's because it's usually the only chair they can get out of if they're having that problem. So if I will notice something like that, and I'll talk like, well, why is that chair your favorite? And then you find out, well, I can get out of it.
Uh,
And I start looking at it, like it has arms, it's a bit higher than everything else in the house. Usually, no one has any problems getting the power recliner chair.
right.
Everyone loves that thing. So,
I
and then
guess
find out like if they're sleeping there, why are they sleeping there? Yeah.
true. True.
So it's a lot
Too
that I
high
uncover in
or
my
too low.
interview process.
That's interesting. So I guess our responsibility as an industry is to know all the different things that are out there and really bring that in. Because if we're looking at our 85-year-old grandmother, you know, she, she might be a little disconnected with what's going on in the world. She might have a smart device, an iPad or something that, the grandson or the grandchild gave them, but
Hmm.
they don't realize the different type of grab bars or the different type of technology or the different types of things that can actually make their life just a little bit easier. So that's
Right.
very interesting. Our responsibility as an industry is, hey, how do we look at everything, from like living in place institute or the technology world or whatever that is, and really keep that all as tools. Now, since I'm a tech guy,
Yeah.
let's talk about technology. What kind of stuff do you see out there that could possibly help people within their homes? Like, what kind of technology are you seeing?
And there's so much out there that really would help. I think what I find is people's willingness to adopt it more than anything.
Right.
And I actually just was doing a whole presentation for the American OT Association. And I was really diving into like how do we increase the adoption rate for older adults,
Mm-hmm.
because to them it's scary, it's not familiar. I have a lot of people, they have the phones, they have the tablets, so people would assume that they just know how to use it. And they really
Oh,
say, honestly, I can't even send a text, but I can call. I just use it to call. I'm like, are you
right.
interested in learning to do anything else with it? Honestly, honey, not really. I'm like, okay, that's fair.
Right.
Um, yeah, right. Like, and it's really because they tend to gravitate towards either what's familiar and that they have past skill with, or there is some research that shows that peer pressure helps. Like if their friends and family are using it, then they're more likely to actually jump on board with it. So there's actually a lot of different things that can cause someone to choose to use technology. And if it does help their independence in their daily activities, if it provides entertainment, that are also two other factors that will kind of help bolster that.
So if
But
that pain point outweighs the annoyance of trying to learn it, then they're more
then
apt to use it.
exactly. But until they reach that point, then like I have a lot of people are like, it's fine the way it is. I'm like, oh, okay.
Right.
But I have some people who do have like the smart speaker systems
Mm-hmm.
that I saw one in someone's house the other day, and I was like, do you actually know how to use that, or is that for your son? And they're like, oh, actually, we kind of do know how to use them. Like, what do you think about the medication reminders going on that?
Right.
And the wife set it up for her husband, and they're like, actually, it's working. I'm like, okay, because like it's
Right.
in the home, they're familiar with it. And so that has been a good system for them. I get a lot of questions about security systems, like the doorbell systems, the
Right.
video systems. There's a lot of concern over security in the home, but also a lot of people who say, like, I just honestly need to know if I actually need to get up out of my chair.
Right.
Um,
Well,
and
that's
so that one's been kind of fun, especially if they're not interested in the actual external system, because again, it comes back to the phone.
right.
But it does turn out there's some cable companies that will wire it to your TV, at least
Yeah.
in my area. So that was good for that person.
Yeah, that's one of the technologies that I like. Cameras definitely not inside the home. Nobody
Mhm.
wants to be spied on. I don't want to be spied on. You don't want to be spied on. Grandma doesn't want to be spied on.
Right.
But the ability to have a video doorbell, you know, as we were speaking about, a lot of our aging loved ones have a hard time getting up. Even if they can get up, it takes them a little longer.
Hmm.
So the ability to see what's on the other side of that door. And, if it's UPS,
Do I really
it's
need to get up and go and deal with that?
right. I'll get the package when I go up to make my tea and make my
Mhm.
lunch. Then I'll make the whole rounds, right?
Exactly.
Or if their favorite grandson is there, they can hopefully choose to open up the door or have
They
that
usually do for the
conversation.
favorite grandson.
I don't know. I mean, when my grandmother's not wearing her hearing aids, she doesn't know what's going on. But
Yeah.
the video doorbell definitely helps because, it pops up on her iPad and she just
Yeah.
tends to have the iPad all the time. So,
Oh, absolutely. And I think the other ones that seem to have gone over really well are, again, like the light, when they realized that like we really do need the light going into the basement.
mhm.
I've had a few people sold on smart light bulbs because they really could use that customization based on the day once they understand it. But most of the time, honestly, it's nothing more than an adhesive motion censored puck light that they don't even have to worry about. They walk by, it turns on, they walk away, it turns off, and they're like, we had no idea, this is amazing.
Yeah, something so simple that's
Mhm.
easy to implement, kind of a thing.
I mean, I think those are the ones that I like when I come back to check on the modifications. They're like the lights. I'm like, I told you, you're gonna love them.
Yeah, they're simple. We put them around. It's great.
Yeah, and it really helps. And then it just follows them around. I
Yeah,
think the other one I know that I hear there's actually two things I hear a lot from family members, like using the stove.
right.
And then that usually ends up being an interesting negotiation between a concerned caregiver and loved one and the older adult themselves who are like, no, I'm fine. And
Mm.
then the caregiver's telling me like the 20 times in the past month that they've left the stove on. And that's a different conversation for a different day of how you navigate that kind of thing. But
Yeah.
the sensor systems that can at least alert the caregiver that the stove is on, like those have been
Right.
popular to those who have those concerns. And then the one thing I haven't been able to find yet, maybe you have a suggestion for me, is the sink. I have a lot of people who accidentally clog the sink with
Mm.
a towel, a spoon, like something fell down into there, like, and they didn't know. And then they leave the water on, they forget to turn it off, and they have a small flood. And I've yet to find something that will just like almost like sense when it's too full and cut it off,
So we
because
found
like the motion censored stuff's not what they're looking for. And then there's like another
yeah.
system I found that actually, because they still need to like fill their sink to wash.
See, the great thing about technology is there's a lot of it out there. The bad thing about it is there's a lot of smart people that are building technology, not realizing how our aging loved ones can possibly use it, meaning that they're technologically adverse, they're worried about things. And then some things could be the greatest thing since sliced bread, but just very hard to implement. So when we talk about water, that's one of those things that's hard to implement. There is technology that can be put on the main line coming into the house that literally maps. It knows the difference between washing your hands, flushing the toilet, putting the dishwasher on or putting the regular wash on. It knows the difference and it knows if there's a leak and it shuts off the water. And then there's also smaller systems that go behind like toilets and sinks and stuff like that. Now, the good thing about something like that is it's going to minimize the issue. I'm not saying there's not going to be water, on the floor, but envision grandma being in a condo, she's sitting in her favorite room, the living room, and then something happens in the bathroom and now all of a sudden there's a flood. She's not going to know until that water gets through the bathroom, the bedroom, and then the carpet's wet in the living room, and now it's a mess.
Right.
And then there's also the other issue of, does grandma know where the shutoff is? Can grandma even get down and shut the shut off? I mean, there's all these things. So on one hand, there is technology out there that can replace it. The negative thing is somebody has to do it. We have to call a plumber. And with anything else, the more complex we make it, the harder it is for adoption. And that's where it comes down to. But there is stuff out there that can help. Not necessarily know a clog, but that's something I can work on and figure out a way to map it.
I think, we figure out a way to just like, it's kind of like when the stove has been left on too long, it can shut off, like something's very similar, because I hear that one a lot. They just left the faucet running.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not a problem and sometimes it
is.
Yeah. When there's something clogging it, then you got the problem.
Well, here at Caregiver Smart Solutions, we actually map that the stove is on. And then we're looking at things like, did mom leave the front door open? She left the condo and the stove is still on. Like what's up with that? If she comes back in 2 minutes or 5 minutes, it could be okay. She put a pot of sauce on and she's cooking it down and that's great. But, what we have seen is mom takes something off, like she's making her tea and then she takes it off but she forgets to turn off the burner. And I mean, it happens to us. The kids are yelling and life's crazy. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I
Right.
didn't turn off the burner. Oh my gosh. But the ability to know something like that. What we're doing with our core kit is we're trying to, how do we enable our loved ones to keep their independence for as long as possible? How do we enable them to keep their dignity by not trying to have them wear this butt ugly, system? And how do we enable them to basically not change their habits? Because I don't know about you, but I mean, me trying to change my mother's habit, which is 75, or my grandmother's, which is 95,
You're never going to win.
Right.
It's
So
not
how
happening.
can I just look at little things, and it's also about the conversation, right? It's about, you call mom and say, how are you doing? What does she always say? I'm fine.
Everything's fine.
Everything's fine. And
Why
it's
are you asking me? Why do you keep asking me that, right?
not bothering me. But it comes down to psychology, right? It comes down to, they don't want to be a burden on us. They understand you have your own issues, and I've been around for 80 years, and I get it. You're absolutely right. You have been around for that long, but I'm worried. And what we've found is, on one hand, they do want to make sure that we're not worried about them, right? They understand that we're trying to live our lives, and they don't want us to be worried. But on the other hand, they are more aware of their time in life, where they are in life, and they're definitely afraid of being that person that has gotten up out of their chair and fallen, and nobody has found them for 2 days, or has fallen in their bathroom. They don't want that happen. So they are very interested in, is there something out there that can have their back? And that's kind of what we're working towards. How do we enable them, be like, hey, I got your back, without being intrusive. But we're looking for things like what you were saying before. Are there indicators? Are there habits that we can look at that can say, uh-oh, like urinary tract infection. Mom normally gets up twice a night, and now she's getting up 5 and 6 times a night. I never realized that could lead to a potential fall.
Yeah, because of the, not so much the getting up to go, but again, because the first sign for older adults usually is the change in mental status.
Change in mental.
So you'll have more wandering potentially. I see a lot more agitation, getting lost even in their own home. Of course, obviously like a fever and stuff. So actually, it's not the urinary part that usually comes out first for older adults. And none of us really know why that is. It's like a complete flop of like what a urinary tract to be, if for other people. So like for me, actually, like what I would look at when I see someone, like, obviously the person I walked in on, it was very obvious that something was extremely wrong.
Something's wrong.
But a lot of times, like you just start seeing like the agitation, a increase in wandering, especially later at night. Like, it actually can almost mimic early stage dementia when it's in the early stages of a urinary tract infection.
That's interesting.
And so like you pick up on that, then like, an increase in wandering, and an increase in like just sort of like aimlessly going around the house without purpose. That I think can be picked up by the motion sensors. Like then you would know something's not quite right. Either they're in pain, they're confused, they're lost. I'd get them checked for a urinary tract infection, because a lot of the times that's actually all it is. Even on memory units, they say, oh, the person's getting more agitated, they're having more dementia. I'm like, and then the nurses will just do a test, just like as a kind of like a whatever, and then they find out, yeah, they actually like have a raging UTI.
Huh. So, I mean, if mom's getting up and she's wandering around, it could be because she's wandering to the bathroom because she has a feeling that she's got to go to the bathroom, but she can't go to the bathroom, which then leads to her being really annoyed. Why can't I go to the bathroom?
It's not even that. Actually has nothing to do with the bathroom whatsoever.
Really?
It just like hits their cognition hard.
Huh.
Now, going to the bathroom a lot could be a sign of other things, and I have seen that. It could also be like it's their Lasix day. And they have to go, or like maybe you notice that, because they tend to schedule that. Like, you can't come on Tuesday, Monique, because that's the day I take my Lasix. I'm in the bathroom every 20 minutes. Like, it's a very scheduled routine type thing.
Right.
And so like, if you notice that Tuesday is usually the Lasix day and they're not going to the bathroom as much because the sensor didn't pick it up, like,
right.
Did you take your Lasix? And sometimes they didn't because they had to go out to a doctor's appointment, like, I'm going to take it tomorrow. Or sometimes it also is that they're still retaining fluid. They have COPD or congestive heart failure, and maybe the Lasix dose needs to be upped. Like, I've seen that happen, where the frequency is not as much even on their dose, which means that it's either an exacerbation and they're going to have to go to the hospital pretty soon to get that sorted out, or they need to have like a dosage adjustment.
So let me ask you this, based on that, if you had the ability through technology to, let's say, track the results, I'll pick on UTI again. So,
Mhm.
mom has a urinary tract infection, you bring her to the doctor, she gets medication. Number one, you want to know compliance, right? Is she taking her medication? But number two, you want to see if is there the expected results. Is she going
Mhm.
to the bathroom less, right? With environmental sensors, we could look at other things of what are the results that you're looking for. So like on the wandering thing, we've noticed that. We've noticed that after over time, we noticed that every Wednesday, Mrs. Smith is moving around a lot more. It just turns
Mhm.
out that that's the day she's vacuuming. So after that, we can extrapolate that over time. If all of a sudden I see her out of the blue start wandering on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and then start forgetting to turn off the stove or close the front door or whatever it
I
is.
would start getting very worried.
Yeah.
Something is wrong. Yeah, I think a lot of my practice when you're looking at like the proactive early side is I ask a lot of questions about what's a normal routine because we all have our routines. We don't like to deviate from our routines. It's what keeps us going. And so, what's the normal routine? What to expect? And then when you start seeing things that are out of the ordinary. And I think sometimes things happen once or twice, and I know people
Right.
tell me like, oh, I just forgot that one time because it happened again. No, because I took care of it, and it was because like the grandkids were over and it was chaos, and I just forgot to take my medicine. Like I've got a client who tells me that. I'm like, okay, so like how do we? And his wife was in the hospital, and so like there's a whole system that they had that kind of kept him on, and like with all those changes, it threw him off. It's like, all right, well, let's come up with a different system that can kind of like be stronger against all of that. Because some of this isn't going away anytime soon, right? But when I start seeing patterns of like this has happened more than once, or it's actually even if it happens once, but it's like person goes from not wandering and like they're wandering all over the place, especially in the evenings or the afternoon, and they're going to the front door and opening and closing it, and like just it's so
Doesn't make
drastically different. I'm like, like something's happening here. So you definitely look at patterns, and that you really do need to know though what the person's baseline and normal routine is. Otherwise, you'll never know if there's a change.
So that's really powerful for you. If we were able to map somebody's habits over time and either look for something that is starting to trend,
Hmm.
differently, like the wandering, or something radically different, something changed overnight, and
Right.
we're looking at things like, let's say mom gets up in the middle of the night, but now she goes into the kitchen, she makes her tea, and then she goes into the living room, turns on the boob tube. All right, that could be a one-off, not a big deal. But if she starts doing that 2 or 3 days in a row, something's up, right?
Yeah, I mean, it might be nothing more than I just decided to do this,
Mhm.
but sometimes it's worth asking because maybe she's realizing she can't get down the stairs safely anymore. Maybe she actually spilled her tea on her way down and almost burned herself, and now she's scared. And fear of falling actually can lead to more falls. Just
Oh,
the fear
really?
alone, because it changes how you move. Then people start shuffling. Actually, shuffling is far worse because you're going to trip over your own feet. Um, so like, there's all these things. Like it could just be maybe she just likes that chair now, but then why do you like that chair suddenly out of the blue? Well, my back's been hurting me.
Right.
Yeah, so it's always worth asking about changes in routines because very few times is it just for the sake of something different. There's actually usually a reason for it.
I guess that's good, right? We're creatures of habit. And
Hmm.
unless we're not going to change our habits unless we go through enough pain to make us change that
Right.
habit. So it's
Right.
a lot of psychology that goes into it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole half of my field of study is the biomechanical anatomy and
Right.
neuro and all that stuff, and then the other half, honestly, is psychology. Because even to convince people to change their habits and routines, there's whole approaches to try to elicit that change and support people through it. So, yeah.
Well, listen, I don't want to take up any more of your time. This has been absolutely fascinating. And I got to tell you, thank you very much. I really appreciate everything that you've done for us. You've tested out the kit. You've given us a bunch of great
Yeah.
feedback.
I think it's a
You've educated
wonderful
me on
idea for sure.
synchronicity. I really do appreciate that. And you've taught me so much. I'm the smart guy, and I come from the tech industry, but you're allowing me to get a glimpse of what's going on in the industry, and our conversation. I tell you, it's very intriguing, and there's a lot of things that we can do to really add to your toolkit and help you. So, with that said,
Absolutely.
thank you very much, and hey, I appreciate having you on.
It's always a pleasure.
All right, thank you.